Welcome to Relaxing Subjects. Settle in. There's nowhere you need to be for the next little while, nothing you need to solve, no thought you need to finish. Let your shoulders come down from wherever they've been holding themselves all day. Let the breath go long and slow, the way it does on its own once you stop supervising it. And let me tell you about a very old text, one of the shortest ever written, and one of the strangest, a single page of words that has been whispered and chanted for well over 1,000 years, in temples and mountain caves and quiet rooms, not so different from the one you're in now. I want to begin by saying the words themselves, not to explain them yet, just to let you hear them, the way you might hear rain on a roof before you're awake enough to name it as rain. Because this text does something that almost no other beloved scripture in the world dares to do. It says no. And then it says no again. And then it keeps saying no, gently, patiently, one small negation after another, until it has said no to nearly everything a person could think of. It says there is no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind. It says there is no color, no sound, no smell, no taste, no touch, no object of thought. It says there is no suffering, no cause of suffering, no end of suffering, no path that leads out of suffering. And then, as if that weren't already enough to unsettle anyone, it says there is no wisdom and no attainment either, nothing to gain, and no one to gain it. Sit with that for just a moment, in the soft way you sit with things at this hour. A text treasured by hundreds of millions of people, recited more often than almost any other, and it spends nearly its whole length saying the word no. No eye, no ear, no suffering, no path, no wisdom, no attainment. If you had never heard of it, you might think it the saddest thing ever written. A long, quiet emptying out of the whole world, a hand sweeping everything off the table and leaving the table bare. And here is the first strange, warm secret I want to give you before we go any further. The one small sentence that turns the whole thing over like a stone in a stream. Emptiness, the word at the heart of this text, does not mean that nothing is there. It means that nothing stands alone. Let that settle. Nothing is missing. Nothing has been taken away. The world is exactly as full as it was a moment ago. The lamp still glows. Your blanket still has its weight. The night still holds its quiet. Nothing has vanished. It's just that, when you look very closely, you find that not one single thing in all of it stands entirely on its own. Everything is leaning on everything else. The lamp needs the electricity and the glass and the hand that switched it on and the eye that sees its light. Take any of those away and the lamp's glow is not quite the same lamp's glow. Nothing in the whole soft night is a little island. Everything is a knot in a net, held by every other knot. That is what the word emptiness means in this old text. Not a void, not a blank, not a hole where the world used to be. It means empty of standing alone, empty of being its own little self, sealed off, independent, needing nothing. And when you understand it that way, when the word stops sounding like loss and starts sounding like connection, the whole long chain of no eye, no ear, no suffering, no path begins to feel like something else entirely. Not a taking away, a loosening, a soft unclenching of the hand. But I'm getting ahead of myself, and there's no hurry tonight. Let me set the scene, because this text is not just a list of ideas. It has speakers, it has a picture at its center, and it's a beautiful one, worth holding in your mind as you drift. The words are spoken by a figure called Avalokiteshvara. It's a long name, and you don't need to hold it tightly. Let it move through you like a slow syllable. Avalokiteshvara. In China, this same figure is loved under the name Guanyin. In Japan, Kannon. In Tibet, Chenrezig. Different tongues, different lands, the same tender presence. And of all the things this figure is known for, the deepest is compassion. Avalokiteshvara is the one who listens to the suffering of the world, the bodhisattva of compassion, the one who bends toward pain the way a tree bends toward light. When people are frightened, when they are grieving, when they are lost in the dark, it is Avalokiteshvara they call. And the figure Avalokiteshvara is speaking to has a name too, Shariputra. Now here is the small, quiet drama that most people rush right past, and I don't want us to rush it, not tonight. Shariputra was not a beginner. Shariputra was, in the older tradition, the disciple famous above all others for one thing, wisdom. He was called the one foremost in wisdom, the sharpest mind among all the Buddha's students, the great analyst, the one who could take any question apart and see clearly to its bottom. If you wanted the clearest thinker in the room, you wanted Shariputra. So look at what's happening here, and let it be beautiful rather than merely clever. The one whose whole being is compassion is teaching the one whose whole being is wisdom. The heart is speaking to the head. The figure who feels the world's suffering most tenderly is turning to the figure who understands the world most precisely and offering him something even his great precision had not yet fully grasped. It's as though the deepest kindness in the world leaned over toward the sharpest mind in the world and said, softly, there is one more thing, and it is the thing that will finally let you rest. Hold that picture as you lie there, the two of them, compassion and wisdom facing one another. It is not an argument. It is not a lecture. It is the gentlest handing over of the one insight that loosens everything. And what makes this all the more remarkable is how small the text is. This is not a great sprawling book. In the form most people recite, the short form, the one chanted daily across China and Japan and Korea and Vietnam and Tibet, it runs to only about 260 Chinese characters. 260. You can chant the whole thing in a minute or two. A single page. Less than a page. You could copy it out by hand in the time it takes a cup of tea to cool. And yet here is the wonder of it. Those 260 characters are said to hold, distilled inside them, an entire library. Because this little text belongs to a much, much larger family of teachings called the perfection of wisdom. The Sanskrit for that is Prajnaparamita. Let the sound of it roll slow and low. Prajnaparamita, the perfection of wisdom. And these perfection of wisdom teachings are vast. They run to tens of thousands of lines. The largest version of them stretches to 100,000 lines. 100,000, an ocean of text, more than any single person could comfortably hold in a lifetime of reading. And this tiny page, this 260-character whisper, claims to be the heart of all of it. The very core, the one drop that carries the taste of the whole ocean, that claim is even written into its name. The full title in Sanskrit is Prajnaparamita-hrdaya, the heart of the perfection of wisdom. And that word, hrdaya, is doing something lovely, something worth pausing over. Because hrdaya means heart. Yes, the beating heart, the warm center, the tender middle of a thing. But it also means essence, the core, the distilled inner truth of something, the part that, if you had only that, you would have what mattered most. So the title is not modest. It is saying, here, in this single page, is the beating heart of 100,000 lines. Here is the essence. If the whole vast literature of the perfection of wisdom were a great tree, spreading its branches across centuries and countries, this little text is the seed you could hold in the palm of your hand, the seed that contains, folded up inside itself, the whole tree, the heart, the essence, both at once, in one small word. There is something deeply restful in that idea, I think, when you let it in slowly, that the enormous can be folded into the small, that you don't need 100,000 lines tonight, you don't need the whole library, you need one page, one heart, one essence, whispered slowly enough to follow. And the rest can wait, or the rest can simply not be needed at all, because the whole tree is already here in the seed. Now, let me come back to the question that has been quietly waiting this whole time, the one I set down a few minutes ago and promised to return to. It's the natural question, the one anybody would ask. If this text is nothing but a long, patient chain of no's, no eye, no ear, no suffering, no path, no wisdom, no attainment, then why on earth would anyone recite it to feel calm? Why would millions of people, over more than 1,000 years, choose this of all texts to chant when they wanted peace? Why reach for the page that says no to everything when you're looking for comfort? It's a fair question. It might even sound at first a little backwards. When we want to feel better, we usually reach for yes. We reach for reassurance, for something added, for a warm word placed into our hands. We want to be given something. And here is a text that seems, on its face, to give nothing, that seems line by line to take things away. But stay with me, softly, because the answer is the whole reason this became a sleep text, a bedtime whisper, a thing people say in the dark to let the day dissolve. The answer is that all those no's are not taking things away from the world. They are loosening the grip of the mind that clutches at the world. Think for a moment about what your mind has been doing all day. And don't judge it, just notice it the way you'd notice weather. All day, quietly, without ever being asked, your mind has been gripping. Gripping at tasks, gripping at worries, gripping at the thing someone said and the thing you wish you'd said back. Gripping at plans, at fears, at the endless small list of what still needs doing. It grips at your idea of yourself, who you are, how you're seen, whether you did enough. It grips even at its own thoughts, holding each one a little too tightly, turning it over and over. The whole day is, in a way, a long clenching, a fist that never quite opens. And what this old text does, this is the secret of it, is it goes gently, one by one, to each of the things the mind is gripping. And it loosens the fingers. No eye, it says, and the grip on seeing eases a little. No ear, and the grip on hearing eases. No suffering, and the grip on the day's ache loosens its hold. No path, no ladder you're anxiously climbing, no distance still to cover, no rush. No wisdom to seize, no attainment to chase, nothing you have to get, nowhere you have to arrive. Each no is not a wall. Each no is a hand opening. A finger, one at a time, letting go. That's why it soothes. Not because it hands you something new to hold, but because it quietly asks you to set down everything you were already holding. And there is a deep bodily relief in setting things down. You know this feeling. You've felt it in your own hands at the end of a long day, when you finally put down the heavy bag you'd been carrying so long you'd forgotten it was heavy. That sudden lightness. That little rush of ease as the muscles remember they don't have to clench anymore. The text does that, but for the mind. It is the slow putting down of a bag the mind has been carrying since morning. And notice, this is important, and it's the same warm secret from before. Come round again. The world doesn't disappear when the grip loosens. When you set the heavy bag down, the room is still there. The floor is still there. You are still there. Nothing has vanished. You've simply stopped straining against it all. The eye still sees. You've just loosened the anxious clutching at seeing. The day's tiredness is still real. You've just stopped bracing against it. The nose don't erase anything. They only unclench the fist. That's the whole gentle trick of it. So when the text says no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, it isn't claiming you have no senses. You plainly do. You can hear my voice right now, feel the weight of the blanket, sense the darkness against your eyelids. What it's loosening is the grip that says each of these is a solid, separate, permanent little thing that you must defend and manage and hold on to. It's saying, let even these be light. Let even your senses rest in the net of everything, leaning and held rather than standing alone like anxious sentries. Let seeing be soft. Let hearing be soft. Let the whole apparatus of you go loose, like a hand uncurling on the pillow. This is what people found over centuries when they chanted these words slowly in the evening. Not a philosophy exam. A release. The rhythm of it, the repeating no, 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 is itself a kind of exhale. Say it slowly enough, and it stops being an argument and becomes a breathing. Each phrase, a little letting go. Each negation, a loosening of one more finger, and by the end, if you've followed it gently, rather than gripping even at the text itself, the mind is not full of ideas. It's simply open, unclenched, resting, and that is why it has been carried for so long, from India across the deserts into China, into Japan, into Tibet, from ancient monasteries into your own quiet room tonight. Because a text that patiently loosens the grip of the mind is exactly the kind of text you want beside you at the edge of sleep. Sleep, after all, is itself a letting go. You cannot grip your way into sleep. You cannot clench your way into rest. Sleep comes precisely when the fist opens, when the last thought is finally set down, when you stop holding on. And this old page, this heart, this essence, this seed of 100,000 lines is, more than almost anything ever written, a long, tender instruction in how to open the hand. Let me say those first words again now, more slowly, and hear them differently this time, not as loss, but as loosening. No eye, let the eyes rest. No ear, let the listening soften. No suffering, let the day's small aches loosen their grip. No path, nowhere to go, nothing to climb, no distance left tonight, no wisdom to grasp, no attainment to chase, nothing to get, nowhere to arrive. Only this, the breath going out, the hand opening, the bag set gently down on the floor beside the bed. Do you feel how the same words that seemed cold a little while ago now feel almost like a lullaby? That is the whole turn of this text, and we've only just begun to follow it. The words never changed. Only the grip on them changed. That is the entire teaching, hidden in plain sight, that so often it is not the world that needs to change for us to find peace, but only the tightness of our holding. And there's a small human beauty in remembering who is saying all this, and to whom. It's Avalokiteshvara, compassion itself, doing the loosening. This is not a stern master demanding you give things up. It is the most tender figure in the whole tradition, the one who listens to every cry in the world, leaning close and saying, softly, you can put it down now. All of it. You've carried it long enough. And the one being spoken to, Shariputra, the brilliant one, the sharp one, the one who understood so much. Even he is being shown that there is a rest deeper than understanding, an ease that all his fine analysis had not quite reached. That even the wisest mind, the one that grips ideas most skillfully, is invited, finally, to open its hand. There's a reassurance in that too, isn't there? If even Shariputra, foremost in wisdom, needed to be reminded to loosen his grip, then whatever you've been gripping today, however tightly, you are in gentle company. You don't have to be finished. You don't have to have figured it all out. The invitation isn't to understand more. It's to hold less. So let's stay here a while longer in the loosening before we go on to what the word emptiness truly points to and why even the most sacred lists in all of Buddhism get quietly set down. For now, just this, 260 characters. A single page that holds 100,000 lines, a heart, an essence, a seed, spoken by compassion to wisdom, and every no in it, not a wall but an opening hand. Feel the breath again, long and slow, unhurried, no one counting it, nothing to fix about it. Let it come in on its own and let it go all the way out. And on each out-breath, you might let one small thing go, not by force, never by force, just by loosening. The thing from work, the unfinished conversation, the plan for tomorrow that will keep perfectly well until tomorrow. The idea of how this night is supposed to go. One finger at a time, no path tonight, nowhere to arrive, no wisdom you have to seize before morning. Only the hand, slowly opening, and the soft dark, and the old words moving through the room like water, finding the lowest, most restful place. Because here is the thing that makes this text so unlike what people expect when they first hear those no's. They hear no suffering, no path, no attainment, and they brace, thinking it means the world is being called empty in the cold sense, meaningless, hollow, not worth caring about. And nothing could be further from what the words intend. The world is not being emptied of meaning. It is being emptied of your desperate grip on it. And those are opposite things. To loosen your grip on someone you love is not to love them less, it's to stop clutching them so hard that neither of you can breathe. To loosen your grip on the day is not to say the day didn't matter, it's to let the day be complete, finished, allowed to end, so that you can rest. Emptiness, in this old and gentle sense, is not the absence of the world. It's the presence of the world without the ache of holding it too tightly. And that ache, that constant, low, all-day ache of holding, is so familiar to us that we mostly don't even feel it as an ache anymore. It's just the background hum of being awake and busy and responsible. But it's there. It's in the jaw you're only now letting go slack. It's in the shoulders you've dropped twice already tonight and could drop a little further still. It's in the 100 tiny tensions the body carries as the physical shape of a gripping mind. And this text, chanted slowly, reaches into all of that, not with force, but with permission. Permission to stop holding. Permission to let the eye be just an eye and not a watchtower. Permission to let the self be light, held in the net of everything, leaning and leaned upon, rather than standing alone and exhausted, guarding its own small borders through the night. That's the loosening. That's the mechanism, said simply, though we'll go deeper into it as the night goes on, into what emptiness really is, and how it turns out to be the same thing as everything being connected, and why the text goes so far as to set down even the Buddha's own first teaching, and what that last strange line of pure sound at the very end is for. There's a whole slow journey still ahead, and it all drifts like a river toward that final murmur, Gone, gone, gone beyond. A sound made not to be understood but to be let go of, the way you're about to let go of this whole long day. But we're not there yet. We have all the time in the world, and the world has been set down, at least a little already, so let the words keep loosening. No eye, soft, no ear, soft, no suffering to brace against, no path to hurry down, no wisdom to clutch, no attainment to chase. Nothing you have to become before the morning comes, just the hand, one finger at a time, opening on the pillow. Just the breath, long and slow, going out into the dark. And compassion itself, leaning close in the quiet, saying what it has said to the wisest among us for more than 1,000 years, you can put it down now. You've carried it long enough. Let it be light. Let it all be light. And as the grip keeps loosening, notice how the nose begin to feel less like they're pointing at things out in the world, and more like they're pointing at the tight little labels the mind keeps slapping onto everything. Because that, it turns out, is where all the gripping really happens. Not in the world itself, which asks nothing of you and holds no opinion of the hour, but in the endless naming and sorting and judging the mind does on top of the world. This is good, this is bad, this must be handled, this cannot wait, this is who I am, this is what they think, this is what I failed to do. Layer upon layer of labels, each one a little handle the mind grabs. And the text, so patiently, reaches for each handle and loosens the fingers around it. Not the eye, the grip on the eye. Not the world, the grip on the world. Not you, the anxious clutching at the idea of you. There's a lightness waiting on the far side of that loosening, and you may already be feeling the first edge of it, that slightly weightless feeling, like the moment a held breath finally releases, like the first soft sink into a bed that's been waiting for you all day. That's the direction the whole text is moving. Toward lightness, toward the open hand, toward the far shore where nothing needs to be carried across. So rest here for now, in this first loosening, and let the picture stay warm in your mind as the night deepens. The two figures facing each other in the quiet compassion and wisdom, the tender one and the sharp one, the single small page that holds an ocean, the heart, the essence, the seed, and every no within it spoken slowly, softly, as what it has always truly been, not a loss, not a void, not a cold emptying of the world, but a hand, patiently, tenderly, finger by finger, learning at last how to open. And so we arrive, slowly and without hurry, at the word itself. The single word that the entire sutra revolves around the way a planet moves around a sun it cannot quite touch, but cannot leave. The word that has been translated into nearly every language that has ever tried to hold a Buddhist idea, and that has been misunderstood in nearly all of them, not because the translators were careless, but because the word points to something the ordinary mind does not naturally face in this direction. The word is nyat. Say it slowly, if you like, in the privacy of your own quiet. Sunyata. 3 syllables, soft and open, ending on a breath rather than a stop. Nyat, emptiness, and here, right at the beginning of what the word means, is where we need to pause and be very careful. Because emptiness, in the English ear, carries weight of a particular and unhelpful kind. It sounds like absence. It sounds like a room after the furniture has been removed, the walls still bearing the outlines of what used to hang on them, the floor still showing the dents where the legs of a heavy table once pressed down. It sounds like the feeling of a house after someone has gone. It sounds like loss. It sounds, if you let the word settle without any further guidance, uncomfortably close to nothing. That is not what Nyat means, not even slightly. And the history of this misreading is long enough and widespread enough that the sutra itself, you could argue, is structured partly as a protection against it, a series of moves designed so that the mind can receive the teaching without collapsing it into the one thing it most fears, which is that everything it cares about might turn out to be without any meaning or substance at all. So let us set aside, one by one and without any rush, the three most common misreadings that tend to gather around this word like fog around a coastline. They are easy misreadings, honest ones even, and setting them aside is not a correction in the scolding sense. It is more like clearing a window so that the actual view becomes visible. The view has always been there. The fog was just in the way. The first misreading is nihilism. The reading that emptiness means the world is a void, that existence is fundamentally hollow, that nothing is real, and therefore nothing matters. This is perhaps the most understandable misreading because the sutra, on its surface, does appear to be saying something in this direction. No form, no feeling, no perception, no suffering, no path. If you move through that list quickly and without context, it can sound very much like a catalogue of negations, a text that is systematically dismantling the world and leaving nothing behind. A kind of philosophical wrecking ball, demolishing room after room and sweeping the rubble away until there is only an empty lot and a cold wind. But this is precisely what the sutra is not doing, and the guard against this reading is built right into the text's most famous line. When Avalokiteshvara says that form is emptiness, he does not stop there. The sentence does not end. It turns around and completes itself. Emptiness is form. Those four words, emptiness is form, are the entire defense against the nihilistic reading, tucked into the same breath as the opening that could be mistaken for it. If form were simply emptiness and the sentence ended, you might have a nihilistic sutra. But the sentence comes back, and coming back is everything. Emptiness is form. The world has not been dissolved, its nature has been clarified. We will spend a good deal of time with this bidirectional formula, and it will repay the attention. The second misreading is adjacent to the first, but has a slightly different flavor. It is the reading that the world is an illusion, that what we perceive is fundamentally unreal, a kind of cosmic magic trick or dream from which we could, in principle, wake up to find that nothing ever actually existed. This reading has a long life in popular summaries of Eastern philosophy, and it appears in various forms in New Age contexts, where the idea that the material world is just an illusion is sometimes treated as both liberating and, paradoxically, as a reason to stop taking anything seriously. If nothing is real, then perhaps effort is unnecessary. Perhaps loss is not truly loss. Perhaps suffering itself can be dismissed as a kind of mistake in perception. The sutra does not teach this either. In fact, the tradition from which the Heart Sutra arises is quite careful to insist that the distinction between real and illusory is itself one of the conceptual pairs that emptiness dismantles. The world is not declared unreal. Phenomena are not shown to be a dream that will dissolve when you wake up correctly. What the teaching does instead is far more interesting and in certain ways far more demanding. It shows that phenomena do not have the kind of fixed, solid, independent reality we tend to assume they do, while still fully allowing them their arising, their passing, their causes and conditions, their weight and texture and consequence. The chair is not an illusion. The chair is just not as rigidly, independently, self-standingly chair. ish, as the unexamined mind tends to assume. And that difference, which sounds small when put that way, turns out to change almost everything. The third misreading is more recent and comes with the particular authority of scientific language, which gives it a persuasiveness the other two misreadings lack. It is the analogy, widespread in popular science and spirituality writing, that emptiness in the Buddhist sense corresponds to what physics tells us about matter. The argument runs something like this. Modern physics shows us that solid matter is mostly empty space, that what appears to be a dense object is mostly a swarm of particles held apart by forces, and that at the deepest level matter and energy are interchangeable. Therefore, the sutra's statement that form is emptiness is essentially a statement that matter is energy, that solid things are mostly space, that science and Buddhism are saying the same thing in different languages. This is a lovely idea, and it has the advantage of making the sutra feel contemporary and scientifically validated. But it is not what the sutra means, and the scholars and teachers who work most closely with the text are consistent and gentle in pointing this out. The sutra's emptiness is not a claim about the physical composition of matter. It is not an early intuition about quantum mechanics or particle physics. It is a teaching about the nature of the relationship between phenomena and independent selfhood, about whether things exist in isolation and from their own side, complete and self-enclosed, or whether they arise only in dependence upon other things, upon conditions and relations and the mind that apprehends them. The physics analogy, however appealing, changes the subject. And changing the subject is exactly what the misreading does. It takes a teaching about interdependence and grasping, and the structure of experience, and it converts it into a statement about the microstructure of matter, which is a different question entirely. So we set this analogy gently aside, not with contempt for the people who find it moving, many of whom are drawn to the sutra precisely because of it, which is its own kind of useful doorway, but with the recognition that the door it opens leads to a slightly different room than the one the sutra actually offers. And the room the sutra actually offers is, in the end, far more intimate and far more immediately available to the mind that is right now in this quiet, beginning to soften toward sleep. With the three misreadings cleared away, we can turn toward what Nyat does mean. And the most precise and careful way into its actual meaning comes through another Sanskrit word, svabhava. Sva means own or self. Bhuva means nature, being, existence. Svabhava, own being, inherent existence, the quality of existing from one's own side, independently, self-contained, needing nothing outside itself to be what it is. When the tradition says that things are empty, what it means, in the most exact formulation available to it, is that things are empty of svabhava, empty of inherent, independent, self-standing existence. Not empty of existence altogether, just empty of this particular and very specific kind of existence, the kind that would be self-enclosed, self-generating, self-explaining, needing no other thing to be what it is. Think of any object you know well. A cup, say, a simple ceramic cup, sitting on a table, holding nothing at the moment, just sitting there, being a cup. The ordinary, unexamined assumption about the cup is that it has its cupness from itself, that it is a cup in the way that a mathematical truth is true, on its own, regardless of anything around it. Complete and self-enclosed, cup through and through, with nothing outside needed to make it so. This is svabhava, the assumption that the cup carries its own being inside itself, like a flame, carries its own heat. But look more carefully at the cup. It is ceramic, which means it was clay, which means it came from the earth, which means it carries the conditions of particular soil and particular water and the hands of particular people who dug it and shaped it and fired it. It is a cup because someone decided to drink from it, because hands exist in a shape that can hold it, because mouths exist that want liquid, because the entire elaborate dependency network of human civilization created both the need for cups and the concept of cups and the word cup and the cultural assumption that this is what you use for this purpose. Take away the hands and the mouths and the social world and the concept, and you have an object of a certain shape. But the cupness of it, that particular quality we mean when we name it, is not sitting inside the clay, waiting to be discovered. It arises from the meeting of the object with all of that. It is a dependent arising. It is empty of inherent cupness, while being fully, functionally, practically a cup. This is Nyat at the most ordinary and approachable level. And once you see it in the cup, you start to see it everywhere, not because it is strange, but because it is the most natural thing in the world. The world was always this way, always arising in dependence rather than in isolation, always woven rather than discrete. The teaching does not add something new to the world. It removes an overlay we have been applying, a kind of mental varnish of assumed self-enclosedness that we coat over everything we encounter, that makes each thing seem to exist in a bubble of its own making. Now we can return to the pivotal formula, the line from the sutra that everyone has heard, even those who have never opened a Buddhist text. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. In Sanskrit, rupa nyat, nyataiva upa. But the sutra does not give just this couplet. It extends the formula into 4 movements, and each movement adds something essential to the whole. Form is not different from emptiness. This is the first movement. Between form, the world of shapes and colours and textures and things that can be touched and measured, and emptiness, the absence of inherent, independent existence, there is no gap. They are not 2 separate territories with a border between them. The form you see and the emptiness of that form are not 2 different facts about 2 different things. They are inseparable. This is not saying that form vanishes into emptiness or that emptiness is hidden behind form. It is saying, look at the form, all the way in, past the surface, past the edges, past the assumed self-enclosedness, and emptiness is what you find. The 2 do not differ. Emptiness is not different from form. The second movement reverses the direction. Just as form has no existence apart from emptiness, emptiness has no existence apart from form. This is crucial. Emptiness is not a background, a void, a substrate that underlies the world of forms the way a blank canvas underlies a painting. Emptiness is not the ground of being in the sense of something more real or more fundamental than the world we live in. You cannot go find emptiness by moving away from form. It is not out there, somewhere cleaner and quieter, waiting. There is no emptiness that is not the emptiness of particular things. In the most precise sense, the teaching says, if you strip away all the phenomena, all the forms, all the arising and passing, you have not arrived at emptiness. You have simply left the territory where emptiness is a meaningful concept. Emptiness and form need each other in the way that the concept of space needs things for space to be between, and the concept of silence needs sound for silence to be the absence of. Form is emptiness. The third movement is the direct identity statement. Not form is like emptiness, or form points toward emptiness, but form is emptiness. The copula does its full work here. What is form? It is emptiness. Completely, without remainder, without a residue of svabhava left over that hasn't been emptied. Every particle of form, every arising, every colour and weight and texture, empty, not hollow, not absent. Empty of inherent, independent, self-enclosed being. That's the entirety of what it is saying, and that entirety is not the annihilation it sounds like, it is the liberation of things from a kind of frozen rigidity we were imposing on them, the liberation into the fluid, dependent, alive, arising they actually have. Emptiness is form, the fourth movement, and the one that most completely seals the defense against nihilism. Not only is form empty, emptiness itself takes form, manifests as form, is always and only encountered as form. The sky is not a void between things, it is part of what makes the flight of a bird possible. Silence is not the absence of music, it is what gives notes their shape. And emptiness is not the black space where form used to be before it was correctly seen through. Emptiness is the very nature of form as it arises, right now, in its dependent and fluid and fully present arising. The bidirectionality of the formula is the whole argument. It runs in both directions, completing a circuit so that neither end can collapse into nothingness. Form does not dissolve into a void, emptiness keeps arriving back as form. And form does not harden into a fixed, solid entity, emptiness keeps reminding us of its nature. The two terms are like two descriptions of the same breath, the out-breath that releases and the in-breath that receives. You cannot have one without the other. And once that circuit is felt, not just understood as a philosophical statement, but actually felt in the way the body feels a completed breath, something in the anxious grasping of the mind begins to ease. There is a certain quality to this easing that is worth staying with. Because it is not the easing of having solved a problem. It is not the relief of having figured out the answer and being able to put the question down. It is more like the easing of having realized that the urgency you were bringing to the question was itself part of what was making the question feel so difficult. Form is emptiness, and that could have been terrifying, like learning the ground isn't solid. Emptiness is form, and that turns the terror into something softer, something that still has texture and color and weight. Something you can still put a cup on and have the cup stay there, while knowing, in whatever quiet place you know things in, that the cup's cupness is a relational, dependent arising rather than a self-enclosed fact. Now the text is ready to do something that, even for those who have heard the Heart Sutra many times, still carries a kind of quiet surprise. It is going to decompose you. Not dramatically, not cruelly, but with a very particular Buddhist analytical patience. It is going to look at the thing we call a person, the thing we call a self, and it is going to ask, what, exactly, is that? And it is going to answer by breaking the apparently unified, apparently solid experience of being a self into 5 streams, 5 categories, 5 aggregates. These are what the tradition calls the skandhas, and the word skandha itself is useful to know. It means aggregate, or heap, a pile, not a solid block. As if to say from the outset, what you are is not carved from a single piece. The sutra does not use the word skandha in a spirit of reduction, the way a scientist might reduce a sunset to the physics of light scattering and feel that in doing so, they have explained it away. The intention is different. The intention is to show the self as a dependent arising, the same way the cup is a dependent arising, not to make it disappear, but to reveal the nature of its arising, and thereby to loosen the grip of the assumption that somewhere inside all of these processes there is a core self, a fixed kernel of selfhood, a little homunculus of me-ness that is doing the experiencing, and that could, in principle, be isolated and examined and found to have its own inherent independent svabhava. There are 5 skandhas, 5 streams that together constitute what we experience as the flow of being a person. The first is urpa, form, and this is the same urpa that appears in Urpanyat. Form is emptiness. In the context of the skandhas, urpa refers to the physical dimension of experience, the body, the material form, the warmth and weight and breath that make up the embodied side of being here. Right now, you have access to it, the surface you are lying on, the temperature of the air on your face, the slight rise and fall of the chest, the particular aliveness that is your body in this moment. That is urpa. That is the first stream. The second is Vedan, and here the translation requires a small note of care. Vedan is often translated as feeling, but it does not mean emotion in the way English speakers typically use that word. It means the basic affective tone of experience, not the complex elaborated emotion, but the first instant of valence, the initial colouring of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral that arises the moment any experience appears. Before you have named it, before you have decided what to do about it, before the story mind has had time to construct a narrative around it, there is this, a bare flicker of pleasant or unpleasant or neutral, the simplest possible assessment, the first breath of response. That is Vedan. It is so fast and so basic that in ordinary waking life we rarely catch it, we only become aware of the emotion that has already been built upon it. But it is there, a constant undercurrent, the subtle colouring of every moment. The third skandha is Saj, perception, recognition. This is the function that identifies, the function that takes the raw material of sensation and says what it is. This is a sound, this is a face, this is danger, this is familiar. Saj is the categorizing function, the matching of current experience to the stored templates of past experience, the capacity to recognize rather than simply receive. When you hear a word and it means something to you rather than being merely a sound, that meaning-making is Saj at work. When a smell calls up a memory so precise, it feels like you are suddenly there again. A kitchen from 20 years ago. A person who no longer exists in your daily life. That too is Saj, the recognition function, doing its astonishing work. The fourth skandha is Saskra. This one is the most difficult to hold in a single translation because it points to something broad and layered. Mental formations, volitional factors, mental fabrications, different translators offer different terms, and each one catches a slightly different face of the original. Saskra points to the conditioned mental activities that shape how we engage with experience, the inclinations, habits, intentions, and dispositions that arise in response to what we perceive. It includes things like attention, intention, volition, hope, fear, confidence, doubt, compassion, envy, the entire spectrum of the elaborated mental life. The part of experience that is most distinctly personal feeling, most distinctly shaped by history and conditioning, and the accumulated weight of everything that has happened to this particular being. If Urpa is the body, and Vedan is the first flicker of response, and Saj is the recognition, Saskra is everything that follows, the full flowering of mental engagement with the world. The fifth skandha is vijna, consciousness, awareness, the bare knowing that something is occurring. In the Buddhist analysis, consciousness does not float free of its objects. It always arises as consciousness of something, consciousness of a sound, consciousness of a sensation, consciousness of a thought, consciousness of a smell. The 6 sense bases each have their corresponding consciousness: eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, and notably mind consciousness, the awareness of mental events as distinct from physical ones. Vijna is the stream of knowing, the light that falls on each arising in turn, without which there is no experience at all. 5 streams: form, the felt tone, recognition, the elaborated mental life, and awareness itself. And the extraordinary thing the sutra is doing by breaking the experience of selfhood into these 5 is this. It is asking you to look through the 5 streams for the self that is supposed to be having them. The self that all 5 are supposed to belong to. The owner, the experiencer, the thing that the body is the body of, that the feelings are felt by, that the perceptions are perceived by, that the mental formations elaborate on behalf of, that the consciousness illuminates for. Look for it. Look carefully. Take as much time as you need. You will find form, certainly. You will find the felt tone arising and passing. You will find recognition happening, that swift categorizing. You will find mental formations arising, intricate and shifting. You will find awareness itself, the bare noticing. But the self that is supposedly standing behind all of these, experiencing all of these, owning all of these, that one is harder to locate. Because it is not a 6th thing, something additional and separate from the 5 streams. The aggregates are the experience in its entirety. There is no remainder, no extra. What we call a self is the 5 streams in their flowing totality, and when we look for the self as a separate entity that is somehow prior to and independent of all of this flowing, we are looking for svabhava where there is only nyat. We are looking for the self-enclosed kernel where there is only the river. This is not a loss. This is what the teaching insists on, gently but consistently. To discover that the self is not an isolated entity standing outside its experience, but a flow of dependently arising processes, this is not the discovery that you do not exist. You are here. The body is real in its arising. The feelings are real in their coloring. The recognitions happen, the mental formations elaborate, the awareness illuminates. All of it is fully real in the way that water is real, in the way that fire is real. It is real as process, as dynamic arising, as something with causes and conditions and consequences and weight. It simply is not real in the way that a stone in a box is real, sitting there self-completely, unchanged whether or not anything touches it, identical to itself, regardless of relation. There is something quite settling about this if you let it arrive without the reflex of alarm. The self as a river is not less of a self than the self as a stone. In many ways it is more alive, more responsive, more genuinely connected to everything it moves through and everything that moves through it, more capable of change and growth and actual relationship. A stone in a box has no real relation with the box, it merely coexists. A river relates to everything, the banks that shape it, the weather that feeds it, the rocks that turn it, the creatures that drink from it. The river is defined by its relationships. And so, the teaching quietly suggests, are you? The 5 skandhas, seen clearly, reveal not a void, but a web. And a web is not nothing. A web is precisely the kind of being that exists only through its connections. Take away the connections and there is no web, not because the web never existed, but because the web is the connections, not a thing that has connections. The self, seen through the lens of the 5 skandhas, is seen as the web rather than the stone. And the web is richer, more real, more fully present and alive than the stone could ever be. Precisely because it is always in relation, always arising from and toward something. Always empty of isolated self-enclosedness, and always, because of that emptiness, fully woven into the fabric of everything around it. And here is perhaps the most unexpectedly beautiful thing about understanding the skandhas in this way. When you decompose the apparent unity of experience into the 5 streams, when you let the body be the body, the felt tone be the felt tone, the recognizing be the recognizing, the elaborate mental life be what it is, the awareness be awareness, something that usually feels like a single heavy object becomes, without losing any of its reality, much lighter. Because the heaviness of the sense of self is not the heaviness of apa, of the actual physical body with its warmth and solidity. The heaviness is the added weight of the assumption of svabhava, the pressure of believing this entire flowing process must be protected as a fixed and isolated thing, defended at every point, maintained against the current of change that would erode it if you ever stopped gripping. That gripping is effort. That effort is exhausting. And most of us carry it so constantly, so quietly, that we have forgotten it is something we are doing rather than something that simply is. We do not notice the grip until the grip loosens, and we do not notice how much energy the grip was taking until we feel the release of energy that comes when it softens even slightly. The 5 skandhas, offered slowly, offered in the way that the sutra offers them, as the very substance of what we are, nothing hidden, nothing added, can be received as an invitation to put down the effort of maintaining the fiction of solidity. Not to stop existing, just to stop gripping the existence that is already fully here, already flowing, already real in its flowing, and needing no additional defending to stay what it is. This is where the body and the teaching begin to meet in the specific way that matters for this quiet hour. Because the body, when it releases the grip, knows immediately what to do. It sinks. It softens. The breath deepens without you asking it to. The weight that had been somehow suspended, the muscles that had been holding a fraction of vigilance even while still, they remember that the night is safe, and the darkness is simply the ordinary night, and nothing is required of them right now. Not even the effort of being a fixed and isolated self. The 5 streams are still flowing, Rupa is still here, the warmth of the body, the surface beneath, the breath moving, Vedana is still arising, the quiet, pleasant tone of rest, the neutral texture of the dark. Saj is still happening, recognizing these words, making sense of these sounds, fitting them into an understanding that has been building through this whole long evening. Saskara is still present, the inclinations and habits of the mind, growing quieter now, growing slower, the elaborations becoming simpler and simpler as tiredness softens the complexity. And Vina, awareness itself, is still here, still illuminating, though the circle of what it illuminates is narrowing gently, as it always does in the approach to sleep. From the wide field of day to something smaller and more interior, and finally to almost nothing, to the single candle flame of consciousness just before it gutters, and the long, still, restorative dark takes over. All of that is the skandhas in their actual living. All of that is Nyat in its actual presence, not as a doctrine requiring intellectual assent. not as a problem requiring a solution, but as the living texture of this moment, this breath, this particular softening of the mind that is already well underway. And you are not losing anything in this softening. That is the whole teaching. You are not losing the richness of the 5 streams by releasing the grip on the imagined stone self at their center. You are gaining the richness back, the actual warmth of arpa, the actual quiet of Vedan settling into neutral pleasant, the actual simplicity of recognition when the mind stops elaborating so hard, the actual peace of saskra when it is no longer working to maintain a fortification, the actual still brightness of Vena when it is not being deployed in service of alarm. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. The 5 skandhas are each empty, and they are each fully, presently, weightlessly here, arising in this breath and this stillness, carrying nothing that needs to be carried across, needing only to be felt, gently, without urgency, the way the night itself rests on the world, covering everything equally and asking for nothing in return. There was a man in India, sometime around the 2nd century of the Common Era, who looked at the teaching we have been sitting with. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form, and instead of treating it as a poetic paradox to be admired from a safe distance, he asked the most direct possible question. He asked, what does it actually mean for something to be empty? Not empty in some vague atmospheric sense, not empty as a mood or a metaphor. What does the word mean, precisely, if you press on it? What is being negated and what is being left standing? His name was Nagarjuna, and the answer he arrived at, worked out with the rigor of someone who genuinely needed to know and would not settle for approximation, is the answer that the Heart Sutra rests on. Its load-bearing beam, the thing keeping the teaching upright beneath all its layers of silence and sound. Nagarjuna founded what became known as the Madhyamaka school, the school of the middle way, named for the space between the 2 great errors, the 2 cliffs a thinker can fall from when they encounter a teaching as radical as Nyat. The first cliff is eternalism, the belief that things have a fixed, permanent, self-standing nature, that somewhere beneath the surface of appearances there is solid, unchanging essence. The second cliff is nihilism, the belief that if things lack that fixed essence, then nothing exists at all, nothing matters, nothing is real in any meaningful sense. In Nagarjuna's work, his great text, the Mulamadhyamakakarika, the root verses on the middle way, is essentially one long, careful, meticulous argument for why both cliffs are wrong. Why the mind that falls off either one has misunderstood what existence actually is, and why the middle path between them is not a compromise, but a third thing altogether, a truer description. And the heart of that third thing, the center of Nagarjuna's answer, is an identity that initially sounds almost too simple, almost like a trick of language. He said, emptiness is the same as dependent origination. Nyat, the emptiness we have been exploring, the lack of inherent, self-standing essence, is identical to pratya samupta, which is the teaching of dependent origination. The observation that all things arise in dependence on conditions, that nothing exists in isolation, that everything that is here because of a vast web of causes and circumstances that brought it into being and that sustains it moment by moment. These 2 teachings, emptiness and dependent origination, had existed in the Buddhist world for centuries before Nagarjuna. Dependent origination was one of the Buddha's earliest and most central observations, the teaching that suffering arises because of craving, craving arises because of sensation, sensation arises because of contact, contact because of the six senses, and so on back through the chain, each link dependent on the one before, nothing standing alone, nothing arising from nothing. And emptiness, Nyat, was the great theme of the Prajnaparamita literature, the perfection of wisdom texts, of which the Heart Sutra is the compressed essence. But they had often been treated as two separate teachings, two different things to understand. Nagarjuna's contribution was to see that they are the same insight, approached from two different directions. Think of it this way, and let this picture settle slowly, the way a clear thought settles into the mind when the mind is quiet enough to receive it. A flame burning, a candle flame, say, the kind that sends a small warm light across a dark room. Ask whether the flame is empty in the sense of Nyat, and the answer is yes. The flame has no inherent, self-standing essence. It does not exist independently. There is no fixed, permanent thing called flame, hiding inside the flickering that would keep flickering if the wick were gone, if the wax were gone, if the oxygen were gone, if the small movements of air that feed it were to stop. Remove any of those conditions, and the flame does not become a diminished flame. It ceases entirely. It is nothing other than the coming together of those conditions. It arises dependently. And now ask whether the flame is empty in the sense of nihilism, in the sense of not existing, of being an illusion. The answer is clearly no. The flame is warm. The flame gives light. The flame can burn your finger if you are not careful. It is fully, genuinely here. It is just here as something arising from conditions rather than as something standing alone. The flame is empty of inherent existence. The flame arises dependently. These are not two facts about the flame. They are one fact, seen from two angles. That is Nagarjuna's identity. That is the load-bearing beam. Let it rest there for a moment. There is no hurry. The room is quiet. Your body is already finding its own stillness. The breath moves in and out, not because you are managing it, not because anything is working to produce it, but because the conditions for breathing are present. Because lungs and diaphragm and air and the quiet chemistry of the body are all gathered here, supporting this arising, this soft and continuous breath. It is dependently originated, and because it is dependently originated, it is empty, empty of some independent breath essence that would exist apart from all of this. And because it is empty of that independent essence, it is completely, genuinely, warmly here. Not an illusion, not nothing. Here, this is the Madhyamaka middle way, not a compromise between two wrong answers. A third thing, a more accurate seeing that dissolves the apparent dilemma altogether. And this is what the Heart Sutra is doing when it says, in its careful, accumulating way, that the bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara sees the five skandhas as empty of inherent existence. He is not saying they do not exist. He is seeing them as they actually are, as things arising in dependence, without fixed essence, fully present, fully real, and fully at their root, liberated from the grip of that imagined stone self at their center. Form is not nothing. Form is empty of what we project onto it, the solidity, the permanence, the independent standing. And in being empty of that projection, form is revealed as what it actually is, dependently arising, interconnected, alive in the web of all things. Now the sutra continues. And here is where it becomes, even for those who have studied it for years, genuinely startling. Because after establishing the emptiness of the five skandhas, after that pivotal fourfold formula, the text does not stop. It keeps going. It turns its gaze systematically onto the other great categories of Buddhist teaching and applies the same treatment. not as decoration, not for comprehensiveness. Because the logic demands it, and because the practical aim, loosening the mind's grip, is not yet complete. The sutra says there is no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no form, no sound, no smell, no taste, no touch, no object of mind. The 6 sense faculties and their 6 objects are named and negated. Let that move through you slowly, because each item is a small release. In Buddhist thought, the sense bases, the 6 organs and their corresponding fields, are the gateways through which experience arises. The eye and its visible forms, the ear and its sounds, the nose and its smells, the tongue and its tastes, the body and its tactile sensations. And then the 6th, which tends to surprise people new to Buddhist thought, the mind as a sense organ, and mental objects, thoughts, images, concepts, memories, as its corresponding field, the things it perceives. The tradition counted 6, not 5, because it recognized that the mind takes in mental phenomena just as the eye takes in light. Thinking is a form of perception, not a separate faculty that floats above the others. All 6 gateways, the sutra says, and all 6 fields, all 12 of what are called the yatanas, are empty. Empty of the independent, fixed existence we unconsciously attribute to them. We move through our days treating the eye as a stable organ that passively receives a stable world. Treating sounds as self-existing objects that arrive from a self-existing outside, treating our thoughts as visitors from some other room. But the eye is a constantly changing process. The sound is an arising in the meeting of air and ear and attention and memory. The thought is not visiting from somewhere, it is arising here, from everything that came before it, in conditions, dependently. There is no fixed eye essence that the eye possesses. There is no self-standing sound object arriving fully formed. There are arising, dependent, empty processes all the way down. The sutra says there is no realm of eyes, and so on until there is no realm of mind consciousness. This is the 18 datus, the sense organs, their objects, and the 6 corresponding kinds of consciousness. Extended and then also released. Nothing in this is nothingness. Everything in this is dependently arising. And then the sutra moves to something even more ancient in the tradition, the 12 links of dependent origination, the very chain the Buddha himself described at the center of his earliest teachings. The 12 nidnas, ignorance conditions mental formations. Mental formations condition consciousness. Consciousness conditions name and form. Name and form conditions the 6 sense bases. The 6 sense bases condition contact. Contact conditions feeling. Feeling conditions craving. Craving conditions clinging. Clinging conditions becoming. Becoming conditions birth. Birth conditions old age and death, and sorrow and lamentation and suffering. This is the chain of suffering, as the tradition articulated it, the sequence of conditions through which suffering perpetuates itself, from the root of ignorance, the not seeing clearly, all the way to the universal fact of old age and death. It is a profound analysis. It maps, with remarkable precision, the way that not seeing things as they are gives rise to craving, and craving gives rise to clinging, and clinging gives rise to the kind of becoming that always ends in something to grieve. And the Heart Sutra says, no ignorance, and no ending of ignorance. No old age and death, and no ending of old age and death. This is said so quietly in the text, just as quietly as everything else, with the same measured tone in which it named the skandhas and the sense bases. But what it is doing is extraordinary. It is taking the 12-fold chain of dependent origination, one of the most revered analytical structures in the entire Buddhist tradition, something that generations of practitioners had contemplated and memorized and turned over in meditation, and saying that this, too, is empty. Not the ignorance itself, it is still pointing at real suffering. But the reified, fixed concept of ignorance, the idea that there is a thing called ignorance with inherent existence, with its own independent essence, standing on its own, that is what is being negated. And the ending of ignorance, the liberation, the other side of the chain, that is also said to be without inherent existence. This is the sutra holding both ends of the chain up to the light and showing that neither end is a fixed, graspable thing. Not the beginning of the problem, and not the solution. Both arise dependently. Both are empty. The chain itself is empty of the independent existence we might project onto it if we began to treat it as a metaphysical map of solid realities rather than as a pointing at tendencies, at patterns, at the way things move when conditions are such. Stay with this. Let the breath be long and slow. There is something happening here that is not an intellectual exercise. Even if the words I am using are precise and careful, the sutra is walking the mind through a series of releases. Each negation is a small unclenching. Each no is a place where something that was held tight can soften just a fraction. No ignorance to grasp at, no ending of ignorance to strain toward, no old age and death to brace against in the way the mind braces, not the fact of them, but the solid imagined thing the mind makes of them, the weight the mind carries by treating them as objects with edges and substance and a fixed, terrifying nature. That weight is what the sutra is setting down. And then comes the most startling moment in the text, the moment that even after centuries of commentary, even in traditions that chant these words every single day, can stop you if you let it. The sutra says no suffering, no origin of suffering, no cessation of suffering, no path. No suffering, no origin, no cessation, no path. This is the Four Noble Truths, the teaching traditionally regarded as the Buddha's first and most fundamental teaching, the teaching he gave in the Deer Park at Varanasi to his first 5 disciples after his awakening. Dukkha, the unsatisfactoriness, the suffering, the dis-ease that pervades conditioned existence. Samudaya, the origin of suffering in craving and clinging. Nirodha, the cessation, the possibility of the end of suffering, the teaching that there is a way out. Musga, the path, the eightfold way, the practical training that leads toward that cessation. These are the cornerstone of the entire edifice of Buddhist teaching. They are what the tradition rests on. They are what distinguishes Buddhist teaching from nihilism on one side and from the belief that everything is fine as it is on the other. And the Heart Sutra says no. No suffering, no origin, no cessation, no path. If this sounds like heresy, that is exactly the reaction the text is designed to provoke. Not because it wants to startle, not as a kind of spiritual shock therapy for its own sake, but because the provocation is the teaching. The reaction, the slight contraction, the brief alarm, the feeling that something important has been taken away. That reaction is the teaching showing you something about your own mind. The mind that recoils is the mind that is grasping even at its own liberation. The mind that grips even the concept of the path. Think of the analogy the tradition itself uses, an analogy the sutra is implicitly invoking in this very negation. A raft. You are on one shore and you need to cross a wide river. You build a raft, you learn to build it, you labor over it, you carry the tools of its construction, you practice crossing. The raft is real. The crossing is real. The far shore is real. You genuinely need the raft. But when you have crossed, when you stand on the far shore with the water behind you and the ground under your feet, you do not carry the raft on your back into the forest. You set it down. Not because the raft was wrong, not because the raft was an illusion, but because the raft was a means, and the means has been used, and carrying it now would only be a burden. The Four Noble Truths are the raft. The Eightfold Path is the raft. The entire analytical structure of Buddhist teaching, the skandhas, the yatanas, the 12 nidnas, these are the raft. And the Heart Sutra is speaking from the far shore. Speaking back to those still building, still rowing to say, the raft works, and the raft does not have inherent existence. It is empty. Even liberation is empty of a fixed, self-standing nature. Even the path is empty. And that is not a threat to the path, it is the path's deepest validation, because a path that is empty of fixed essence is a path that actually moves you, a raft that actually floats, precisely because it is made of conditions that respond and bend rather than of rigid stone that would sink. This is the pedagogical device at the heart of the Prajnaparamita philosophy, the vast ocean of texts of which this single, brief, barely a page sutra is the condensed essence. The teaching negates itself. It does not negate itself because it is confused or self-undermining. It negates itself as the final act of pointing, because a finger pointing at the moon is useful until the moment you mistake the finger for the moon. And then the most useful thing the finger can do is fold itself down, out of the way, so the moon can be seen directly. The concepts, the categories, the carefully worked frameworks, they are fingers pointing. The Heart Sutra is the text that at the very end folds the fingers down. No suffering, not as a denial that suffering exists, but as the release of the concept of suffering as a fixed, graspable thing. No path, not as the denial that practice and effort and the development of wisdom and compassion are real and needed. They are. But as the release of the concept of path as a self-standing object you possess, something you carry on your back after you have already crossed. The bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, seeing clearly, moves freely, and the teaching he is offering to Shariputra, the disciple foremost in wisdom, the one who has analyzed and categorized and understood the great frameworks, is the teaching that even wisdom, in its final reaching, must release itself. No wisdom, the sutra says, no attainment, and no non-attainment. This is where the logic arrives, at its gentlest and most complete, not nothing, not everything, but the spacious openness that neither concept can contain. Let your body go a little heavier now. Let the muscles that were perhaps still holding a trace of the day's tension, the shoulders, the jaw, the hands if they were lightly curled, let them soften, one by one, as if the sutra's sequence of no's were washing over them in turn. No tension in the eye, no tightness in the ear, no clenching in the jaw. No suffering needing to be solved before you can rest. No path needing to be walked before the night can give you what it is already giving. Because this is what the recitation does. This is the mechanism, the answer to the question that has been open since the beginning. The question of why anyone would choose to repeat a text full of negations when they are trying to find peace. Why the tradition reaches for a wall of no as a vehicle for rest. The answer is because each no is a hand opening. Because the mind, left to its own devices in the dark, will grip. It will find something to hold, something to rehearse, something to solve. It will grip the day's events and run them forward and backward. It will grip tomorrow's demands and arrange them in order of urgency. It will grip old fears, old angers, old embarrassments, carrying them through the night as if the night were a continuation of the problem rather than a pause from it. The mind grips because gripping is what it knows. Because it was trained all day, every day, to hold things, to hold plans, to hold self, to hold the story of who we are and what we need and what is at stake. And the Heart Sutra, recited slowly, is a gentle counter-training. Not a forceful stopping of the grip. Force only creates another thing to grip, resistance becoming its own new object of attention. But a quiet, systematic loosening. No I, and the I, the seeing mind, softens just a fraction. No ear, and the listening, the monitoring for danger, the vigilant attention to sound, softens a fraction more. No suffering to rehearse tonight. The sutra does not say this does not hurt. It says the concept of suffering as a fixed, self-standing object you must clutch and examine and solve before you can set it down. That concept is empty. You do not need to resolve everything to rest. The resolution is not a prerequisite for the rest. The rest is available now, as it always has been, before the resolution, beneath the resolution, independent of whether the solving is complete. No path needing to be walked tonight. No wisdom needing to be achieved before the night can offer what it offers equally to all. No attainment standing between you and this breath, and this breath, and this. This is the practice of loosening that the text performs when it is used for sleep. And it works not because sleep is a spiritual goal the sutra aims at. It is not. But because the sutra's actual aim, which is the release of conceptual grasping, and the condition needed for sleep, which is also the release of conceptual grasping, happen to be the same thing. The bodhisattva's instruction to Shariputra is also, if received in the right register, in the quiet and the dark and the heaviness of the late hour, an instruction to the tired, still gripping mind that is trying to find its way to rest. Nagarjuna worked this out with rigor and precision, with verse after verse of careful argument in the Mulamadhyamakakarika. Following the implications of emptiness and dependent origination through every domain, every category, every concept the philosophical tradition had treated as solid. Motion, causation, time, self, even nirvana. Each one examined, each one found to be empty of inherent existence, each one revealed as dependently arisen. Each one thereby freed from the crushing weight of the solidity the mind had projected onto it. The whole project was, in its way, a vast philosophical release. Not a destruction, a release. The way a muscle that has been clenched without knowing it is clenched, feels, when the tension finally goes, not empty in the nihilistic sense, not gone, but open, available, capable of what it actually needs to do. The Madhyamaka school, the school of the middle, carries that opening forward through centuries and traditions, through the great universities of India, through the translation projects in Tibet, through the teaching lineages that brought these ideas across mountain passes and through deserts. Not as abstract philosophy hoarded by specialists, but as living practice. Because the insight that things are empty of inherent existence, that nothing stands alone, that everything arises in dependence, that what we call self is a dependent arising, just as what we call flame, or thought, or sound is a dependent arising, that insight does not stay in the intellect when it is genuinely received. It moves through the body, it loosens the jaw, it opens the hands, It lets the shoulders find their natural, unsupported weight. And the Heart Sutra, in its extreme compression, in its 260 characters, or its single page of Sanskrit, or its 1 or 2 minutes of quiet recitation, performs that movement in miniature. It takes you through the great negations, the skandhas, the sense bases and their fields, the 12 links, the Four Noble Truths, not to leave you in negation, not to deposit you in a void, but to walk you through the releasing of each fixed concept until there is, at the end, a spacious open quality to the mind that is neither grasping at something nor fleeing from something, but simply present, wide. Still think of it as a hand that has been closed all day. The grip of the day's work, the day's worry, the day's performing and planning and protecting. The sutra, received slowly, is a sequence of small openings. The fingers do not fly open. That would be its own kind of force. They relax one by one, without fanfare, without the hand needing to make a decision about it. No eye, and the forefinger loosens just barely. No ear, and the next. No suffering to solve tonight, and another finger finds its release. No path to walk before rest is permitted, and another, until the hand is open, lying quiet, weighing nothing. That is the mechanism. That is what the recitation does when it is received in this way, in this register, at this hour. It is a slow unclenching of the conceptual grip. An unclenching that mirrors, almost exactly, the unclenching the body is already doing as the night deepens. As the muscles give their held tension back to gravity, as the day's vigilance softens into the trust that is sleep. And there is still something ahead of us, the sutra's final passage, the sound it ends with, rather than the argument it might have ended with. The 5 syllables it offers not as a conclusion, but as a carrying. The text arrives at the end of its long sequence of negations, with the mind opened and the hand open, and it does not offer a summary. It offers a mantra, a sound, something to be carried across rather than understood. Something that the tradition describes as the great mantra, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra without equal, and that is, at the same time. Something no translator fully agrees on, something whose grammar is contested, something whose exact meaning the text itself does not explain, perhaps because the explanation would be the wrong kind of thing, would put a concept back in where the text has just finished, gently removing all the concepts. Gate, gate, pragate, prasagate, bodhisattva. These 5 words are there, just ahead, waiting in the sutra's final lines the way the far shore waits beyond the river, patient, not going anywhere, real in its own way that is neither the near shore nor the middle of the crossing, but something else, something that reveals itself only in the arriving. We will come to them, but for now, the breath and the quiet and the weight of the body settling further into this still, supported place. The great middle way thinker from 2,000 years ago and his careful, rigorous arriving at the identity that emptiness is dependent arising, and dependent arising is emptiness. The sutra's long sequence of no, each one a small release. The Four Noble Truths themselves set down, not destroyed, but set down, the way the raft is set down on the far shore by someone who has crossed and does not need to carry it any further. No wisdom to acquire before the night is permitted to do what the night does. No attainment standing as a gate between this breath and the next. Only this. Only the dependent arising of this moment, this breath, this quiet, this body, this particular and unrepeatable darkness of this particular and unrepeatable night, and the emptiness that is not a void, but the open space in which all of it, All of it continues gently to arise. And here, in this particular and unrepeatable darkness, is where the teaching goes one step further than you might expect. One step that most discussions of the Heart Sutra, even careful ones, quietly leave out. You might imagine, if you have followed the thread this far, that emptiness, nyat, is the final answer. That the sutra has been building toward it the way a piece of music builds toward a resolution, and that when it arrives, when the great insight lands, you have traded one thing for another. You have traded the rigid, fixed, anxious self for the open and liberated understanding of emptiness. You have cashed in the old currency and received the new. You have set down the stone and picked up the feather. But the Madhyamaka understanding, the understanding that Nagarjuna worked out with such painstaking care across the pages of the Mulamadhyamakakarika, does not stop there. It cannot stop there, because stopping there would leave you with a new thing to grip. And the whole enterprise of this teaching is the releasing of the grip, not the transferring of it to a worthier object. Nyat, nyat. Say it slowly, even just in your mind. Emptiness, empty, the emptiness of emptiness. Two words that sound, at first encounter, like a philosopher having a very bad night, like someone who has erased so much from the chalkboard that they have finally started erasing the eraser itself. But follow it just a little way, and something unexpected happens. Something that feels, especially in the quiet of a late hour like this one, less like a logical puzzle and more like a small door opening in a wall you had assumed was solid. If emptiness means empty of inherent independent existence, empty of svabhava, empty of that fixed self-standing essence, then emptiness as a concept, as a thing your mind might point at and say there, that is what is ultimately real, must itself be empty of inherent, independent existence. It arises dependently. It is a teaching, a tool, a pointing finger. It is not a new foundation to stand on. It is not a stone to pick up after you have set the other stones down. Think of it this way. You are carrying a very heavy bag, the bag of fixed, solid, independently existing things. Your sense of self as a hard and permanent something. Your beliefs about how the world works, standing on their own whether you look at them or not. Your certainties. Your fears. The ones that solidify in the small hours and feel as though they have always been there and will always be there. You carry the bag and you are tired from carrying it, and then someone says, the bag is empty. And you feel the relief of that, the actual physical weight of the relief, the way a long-held breath releases. And you set the bag down. Good, but then, and this is the step most people skip, if you go and look inside the bag and pull out the emptiness itself and hold it up and say this is the thing I have been looking for all along. This is the real and final truth. You have picked up a new bag, a lighter one maybe, but a bag. Nyat Nyat says, put that down too. Not because emptiness is false, not because the teaching has been wrong. The raft was real. It did cross the water. But you are not living on the river anymore. You do not need to build a house out of the raft. Nagarjuna states this explicitly. Emptiness is itself empty of inherent existence, and in stating it, he seals against the very trap that a concept like emptiness could create, the trap of turning a liberating insight into a new philosophical absolute, a new dogma to defend, a new certainty to carry through the dark. The teaching is medicine. Medicine is not the same as food. You take it while you are unwell. You do not take it forever, just because it once helped. When the fever breaks, you are grateful for the medicine, and you do not need it in the same way anymore. This is, if you let yourself feel it rather than analyze it, quietly generous. The sutra is not asking you to become an expert in emptiness. It is not setting up a new hierarchy in which the people who have grasped emptiness correctly are better than the people who have not. It is pointing at something that, the moment you really grasp it, releases the pointing. The moment you see what the finger is pointing toward, you stop staring at the finger. And there is something in this that maps very naturally, very gently, onto what the body and the mind need right now, in this hour, in this quietness. Because the grip that keeps us from sleep is almost always a grip on something that feels like it has inherent independent existence. A thought that seems to stand on its own, solid and urgent, not arising dependently, but just there, just real, demanding to be resolved before the night is permitted to proceed. A worry that seems permanent. A regret that seems to have always been and will always be. A question that seems to require an answer before rest is allowed. Nyat Nyat says, very gently, even the thought has no inherent existence. Even the worry arises dependently and passes dependently. Even the certainty that you must figure this out before you sleep is itself empty of self-standing essence. Put it down the same way you put the other things down. Not because it is not real, it is as real as everything else the sutra has touched, but because it is not fixed. It is not permanent. It arose. It will pass. You do not have to carry it across the night. The breath continues. The body settles a little further. The mind does what minds do. It notes this, it considers that, it turns something over briefly, and then it lets it fall, and what falls in the quiet of this room makes no sound at all. There is still the mantra. The Heart Sutra ends, both the short and the long recension, both the version that opens in Xuanzang's careful Chinese characters, and the version framed at Vulture Peak, with the Buddha seated in the background of everything. It ends not with a summary, not with a conclusion, not with a lesson to carry home and practice in 7 steps. It ends with 5 words in Sanskrit that the text itself calls the great mantra, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra that is without equal, the mantra that removes all suffering. 5 words that are not explained, 5 words that are given, and then the sutra is over. Gate gate pragate, prasagate bodhisvh. Translators, scholars, practitioners across many centuries and many languages have not fully agreed on how to render this, and that disagreement is itself worth sitting with for a moment, not as a problem, not as something that needs to be resolved before you can appreciate the mantra, but as a feature, as part of what the mantra is doing. Gate, most often rendered as gone. Pragate, gone beyond or gone to the other shore. Prasagate, gone completely beyond or gone entirely to the other shore. Bodhi, awakening, svich, a ritual exclamation, something in the neighborhood of so be it, or hail, or simply a sound of completion, the way certain prayers or invocations end with a word that is less a word than a seal, less a meaning than a gesture of closing. But the verb gate is grammatically complicated in Sanskrit. It is a feminine vocative or locative form of a word related to going, and the question of whether it is addressing someone or describing a state or something else entirely is one that scholars have puzzled over for a long time. What the text says about the mantra is only this, that it removes all suffering, that it is true and not false. It does not provide a footnote. And this is entirely consistent with what the sutra has been doing all along. The mantra is not offered as a concept to grasp, it is offered as a sound to inhabit. as a movement to make internally, as something you do with the body and the breath and the voice, rather than something you understand with the analytical mind, which is fitting. Because the analytical mind has just spent the entire sutra being gently, systematically, kindly relieved of everything it was holding. The image of the far shore, Pram, is one of the oldest images in Buddhist literature. The near shore is where we are. The far shore is nirvana, liberation, the other side of suffering. The river is samsara, the cycle of conditioned existence. The raft, famously in the Pali texts, is the Dharma itself, the teaching which you use to cross and then set down, not carry on your back. And the mantra is, in this reading, the sound of going. Gone, gone, beyond. Gone, completely beyond. The sound of the raft being set down on the far bank. But the image does something subtle here, in the context of a sleep narration, in the context of this particular hour, of this particular night. Because going to the far shore is not violent. It is not a struggle. It is a crossing. And crossings, real ones, have a quality of gradualness, of water, of the near shore becoming less defined behind you, and the far shore becoming less impossible ahead of you, until at some point you are simply no longer in the same place you were, and you cannot say precisely when the crossing happened, only that it did. Sleep is like this. The crossing from wakefulness to sleep has no sharp border. There is no line you step over. There is no moment where you say, "Now I am going, now I am gone." There is just the gradual receding of the near shore, the thoughts becoming less insistent, the body becoming less defined, the sense of being a particular self in a particular room beginning to soften and blur, and then at some point you are elsewhere, or you are nowhere, or you are simply not available to the question of where you are, and the night does what the night does with you. Gate, gate, pragate. Gone, gone, gone beyond. Each word is a small letting go, each syllable, spoken or simply held in the mind like a stone that warms slowly in the hand, is a small movement in the direction of the far shore. And because the sutra is not being analytical here, because it has moved out of the register of doctrine and into the register of sound, the mantra meets you somewhere the doctrinal unpacking cannot quite reach, in the body, in the breath, in the rhythmic repetition that bypasses the part of the mind that needs to evaluate and understand and passes directly to the part of the mind that knows how to rest. This is why a wisdom text ends in a mantra rather than a conclusion. The conclusion would be another thing to hold, another formulation to carry. The mantra is something different. It is a vehicle. You get on it. You let it move. Prasagate, gone completely beyond. There is a story, not verifiable in the way facts are verifiable. It belongs to legend, to the texture of how Xuanzang has been remembered across 14 centuries, that the great pilgrim monk, the man who travelled from Tang dynasty China all the way to India and back to bring Buddhist texts home, who translated the short recension of the Heart Sutra into Chinese in the year 649, who is the historical original of the monk in the journey to the West, chanted the Heart Sutra to protect himself as he crossed the Central Asian deserts, the deserts between his home and his destination. The long, uninhabitable stretches of the route, the Taklamakan on one side and the Gobi on another, where water was scarce and direction was difficult and the isolation was total. Whether he literally chanted it, whether the story is precise, the tradition says he did. And there is something in that image, preserved and passed down not as doctrine, but as atmosphere, that feels right. A man in an enormous, empty, sand-coloured silence, chanting a text about emptiness, going, beyond. The near shore of his homeland receding behind him, the far shore of India not yet visible ahead. Nothing around him but the desert's particular kind of open space, which is not barren in the sense of dead. Deserts are full of their own life, their own arising and passing, but bare, stripped of the familiar, stripped of the comfortable context that tells a person where they are and who they are. And in that stripping, in that enormous, still, disorienting openness, the words that say gone beyond. Recited, not because they were explaining anything, not because Xuanzang needed to be reminded what nyat meant, but because the sound was a companion, because repetition in the body steadies something that cannot be steadied by arguments. Because the mantra is not about crossing the desert, it is the crossing. You can let the image be with you for a moment. The sand, the enormous quietness, the sound of one human voice in all of that space, moving, and then the desert gives way, and we come back to the room. There is one more thing to return to, before the narration finds its way to its own far shore. One loop that has been open since the very beginning of this text, since before we had named any of these ideas, before Nyat had been distinguished from nothingness, before Nagarjuna had been introduced, before the skandhas had been unpacked, before any of the careful work of the middle sections. The scene. The long recension of the Heart Sutra, the version that includes the conventional sutra frame, the opening and closing that the short version omits, sets the teaching at Jidraka. Vulture Peak. A real place, a hill near the city of Rajgir, in what is now the Indian state of Bihar, where the Buddha is said to have delivered a number of important teachings. The name comes from the shape of the rock at the summit, which resembles a vulture, or possibly from the vultures that circled it, or both. It is a hill with a double name. In the long recension, the Buddha is present, but he is present in a particular way. He is in a deep meditative absorption, samadhi, and he is not speaking. He is the still center around which the scene takes place. And in the field of his stillness, something arises. Avalokiteshvara, the bodhisattva, looking deeply, and Shariputra, the disciple, listening deeply. And between them, the teaching that will become the Heart Sutra, the conversation that the sutra preserves. The bodhisattva of compassion, the disciple foremost in wisdom. Why this pairing? Why, out of all possible combinations, does this text choose to put these two specific figures in conversation? The Buddha's circle in the early texts includes many disciples with different qualities, different emphases. Nanda, the one with the perfect memory. Mahakassapa, the one noted for his austere practice. Anuruddha, who developed the divine eye. And Shariputra, who was recognized as the one whose analytical intelligence was unmatched, whose ability to understand and systematize and transmit doctrine was the most precise among all the disciples. Foremost in wisdom, the Buddhist tradition's own accolade for him, Prajnaparamita in Pali. The best at exactly the thing the Heart Sutra is about. And Avalokiteshvara, the bodhisattva, not of wisdom but of compassion. Karu, the one who hears the cries of the world, which is what the name means in one of its readings, the one who perceives the sounds of the world, looks and listens and responds. In Chinese tradition, Guanyin, female and gentle, one of the most beloved figures in all of East Asian religion. In Tibetan tradition, Chenrezig, whose compassion is said to be so encompassing that he postponed his own final liberation until every sentient being is free. In Japanese tradition, Kannon, present in 10,000 temples, depicted with many arms that reach in every direction at once to help. The bodhisattva of compassion is the one who delivers the wisdom teaching. And this, when you sit with it, is the pairing that the whole sutra is quietly about. Wisdom without compassion can become cold, can become a kind of refined indifference, can become a vehicle for distance rather than presence. And compassion without wisdom can become entangled, can mistake its own emotion for the other person's reality, can help in ways that are more about the helper's need than the helped. But when they meet, when the insight that nothing stands alone, that everything arises in relation, that the wall between self and other is not the fixed thing it feels like, when that insight is held by a heart that also reaches out, that also hears the cries, that also responds, something different arises. The bodhisattva of compassion knows emptiness from the inside, not as a philosophical position, not as a doctrine to be cited, but as the very condition of his boundless reaching. If Avalokiteshvara had a fixed, independent, bounded self, he could only reach so far. It is precisely his emptiness of fixed selfhood, the fact that he arises dependently, relational all the way through, that allows him to be present everywhere, to hear everything, to have 10,000 arms that each extend in a different direction, without any of them being more him than the others. And he is telling this to Shariputra, to the master of analysis, gently, not to humiliate or correct, but to give the gift that analysis alone, however precise, cannot fully give itself. The sutra is not saying that Shariputra is wrong. He is foremost in wisdom. He has not misunderstood anything. The sutra is saying that there is a step beyond the most rigorous understanding. A step that looks like the relinquishing of rigorous understanding, but is actually its fulfillment. The letting go of the map after you know the territory so well that you no longer need it to navigate. Compassion teaching wisdom. Wisdom receiving compassion. And in the long recension, at the end of the scene, after Avalokiteshvara has delivered the teaching and the mantra, the Buddha comes out of his samadhi, his deep stillness, and says, "Well done." This is what the bodhisattva has said. This is how one practices the deep perfection of wisdom. Well done. The still center confirming what arose within its stillness. The teacher endorsing the teaching that happened while he was present, but not speaking. The conversation complete, the sutra sealed, and then Vulture Peak with its doubled name, vulture-shaped rock or vultures circling above, and the assembly dispersing, and the text finding its way through centuries and translations, and the silk roads of Asia, and the mouths of countless people who have recited it in the early morning and the last evening of their lives. Xuanzang in his desert, carrying the text west to east. You in this room, at this hour, on this night. Each no in the Heart Sutra, no form, no feeling, no perception, no mental formations, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind. There are so many of them, the sutra is almost constructed out of them. Each no is not a door slamming, but a hand opening. Think of what a hand does when it grips. The muscles tighten. The tendons engage. Energy is spent, held, sustained. Gripping is work. And we do it all the time with the mind. We grip thoughts, grip worries, grip the sense of self that we want to be stable. Grip the certainty that the things we are afraid of are as solid and permanent as they feel. Grip the belief that we need to resolve something before the night is permitted to rest. The grip is exhausting, and most of the time we do not know how exhausted we are by it because we have been gripping for so long that we have forgotten what it feels like to open the hand. No form, a hand opening. No feeling, A hand opening. No perception, no mental formations, no consciousness. A hand opening and opening and opening. No eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind. All the senses through which the world arrives, all of them acknowledged, each one named, and then held lightly rather than clutched, and the holding lightly itself being what the no means. Not these things do not exist. Not your eyes are an illusion. But these things do not exist in the rigid, fixed, permanent way that the clutching mind needs them to. They arise, they function, they are real in the way that the river is real while you are in it. And they are not things to grip, because nothing that arises dependently can be gripped the way we try to grip things. No suffering. A hand opening on what the body is carrying tonight. No origin. A hand opening on the story of how it started, the story that loops. No cessation. A hand opening on the need for it to stop on a particular schedule, in a particular way, by a particular hour. No path. A hand opening on the idea that you must be doing something correctly in order for rest to come, that you must earn it, that you must navigate toward it rather than simply allowing the body to do what the body already knows how to do in the dark. No wisdom, no attainment, the hands completely open. Both of them. Nothing held. And in that opening, which is not absence, which is not emptiness in the sense of vacancy, but nyat, the open space of dependent arising. The space that is there precisely because nothing in it is fixed and permanent. In that opening, the breath arrives. It was always arriving. You did not have to arrange it. It does not need you to grip it for it to continue. It arises dependently, and it passes dependently, and then it arises again. And this rhythm, this reliable and effortless rhythm, has been happening all night, whether you attended to it or not. The Heart Sutra, read slowly enough, is a guided release of the grip. Each negation one more finger uncurling. Each no not a subtraction but an instruction. You can let this one go. You were holding it, but you can let it go. The sutra does not ask what you are holding. It knows. It has been watching what we hold for 2.5 millennia, and it knows, and it does not judge, and it offers only the word that makes the hand open. Gate, gone, even the grip can go. The very act of gripping, the mind's habit of grasping, of needing to fix and settle and resolve, gate. It does not need to cross with you to the far shore. You can leave it at the river's edge. It was never part of you, any more than the stone was part of the hand that carried it. Gate, gate. Gone, gone. The body grows heavier in the good way that bodies grow heavy when they finally stop fighting rest. The thoughts do not stop. They never fully stop, even in sleep, but they change their quality. They become less insistent, less solid, less like things that require an answer before the night is permitted to proceed, and more like shapes drifting through a room, shapes that you can notice without needing to name, notice without needing to resolve, notice without needing to hold. Pragate, gone beyond. Not forced, not pushed, not disciplined across, just the river crossing, the way rivers cross, gradually, in their own time. The near shore receding without any drama. Prasagate, gone completely beyond. You do not need to know what the other shore is. This is, after all, what the sutra has been saying all along, in every variation. You do not need to acquire the wisdom before the crossing. You do not need to have understood emptiness correctly before the body is permitted to rest. The text is not a test. The mantra is not a password. There is nothing to pass, and nothing waiting on the other side to check whether you have arrived correctly. Bodhi, awakening, The word is there, in the mantra's last content word before the seal, bodhi, the awakening that the entire tradition points toward. And in the context of this particular moment, this particular body, this particular quietly settling room, it is worth sitting with the gentleness of that. Awakening is not far from sleep. They are neighbors, closer than we imagine. The state that Buddhist teachers across generations have described as the goal of practice is sometimes described as clear, open, luminous awareness, not the chattering daytime awareness that grabs at things and worries and plans and reviews and grabs at things again, but something prior to that, something that was there before the grabbing started and is there in the intervals between grabs. Something the sutra might point to when it says no wisdom, no attainment, because bodhi is not an achievement, not a thing you acquire and keep, but something that reveals itself when everything acquired is gently, patiently, compassionately set down. So be it. The seal, the gesture of completion, the breath at the end of a sentence that is not followed by another sentence. There is a quality to the end of the Heart Sutra that is different from the end of most texts. Most texts, when they finish, leave you facing outward. The book closes, the argument concludes, you put it down and look at the world with whatever the text has given you. The Heart Sutra ends and leaves you facing nothing or everything. Or the same thing which the sutra has been at pains to help you see is not a contradiction. The mantra ends, and there is just the sound decaying in the air, the last syllable of svech finding its way to silence, and then the silence that was always there, which is not the absence of sound, but the ground in which sound arises and returns. You could imagine, very gently, without working at it, Avalokiteshvara and Shariputra on Vulture Peak as the teaching finishes, the hill with its doubled name. The assembly in the late afternoon light that hills get, when the shadow begins to lengthen and the quality of everything softens. Shariputra, the disciple foremost in wisdom, receiving the words of the bodhisattva of compassion and doing what a great student does, not refuting, not immediately debating, but holding what he has heard and letting it work in him. The way a good piece of medicine works, not instantly, not with a sharp edge, but gradually and thoroughly and in ways the patient cannot always track. And Avalokiteshvara, patient, present, with the quality that compassion has when it is not anxious, when it is not trying to fix or force, but simply offering, simply saying, here is what I can see when I look deeply. Here is what I find. Here is the shore when I look toward it. Well done, says the Buddha at the end, coming out of his stillness. Well done. You are allowed to hear that too, if it helps. Whatever it is you have been carrying into this night, whatever has felt like not well done, whatever felt like something that needed to be corrected or understood or resolved before the night could really start, well done. Well done for being here. Well done for breathing. Well done for setting, one more time, the accumulated weight of a day down beside the bed where the morning can find it and deal with it in the morning's way. Well done for letting this voice be company. Well done for the body doing what it is already doing, which is the remarkable and unremarkable thing it does every night, releasing, without instruction, without effort, without requiring that you understand the mechanism. The Heart Sutra has been chanted daily in thousands of temples and rooms and ordinary kitchens and train platforms and desert crossings and quiet places like this one. for somewhere in the neighborhood of 1500 years in its current form and longer in the tradition that produced it. Countless mouths have moved through the same syllables. Countless minds have arrived at the same no and felt the hand open, sometimes only a little, sometimes a little more. Countless bodies have sat in the early morning cold and let the words move through them, not always understanding, not needing always to understand, needing only the rhythm and the repetition and the way that certain sounds, over time, begin to mean not what the dictionary says they mean, but what the body has learnt they mean, which is, you can open the hand. You can open the hand now. This is the sound of opening. The 600 volumes of the Prajnaparamita literature, the enormous, elaborated, detailed and magnificent working out of the perfection of wisdom, distilled into a page. The page containing its own heart. Hrdaya, heart and essence both, the same word. The essence of wisdom is this: form is emptiness, emptiness is form, and the form that is emptiness is not a problem to be solved, but a river to be crossed, and the crossing is not a performance, and the far shore is not a reward, it is just the other shore. Patient, real in its own way, not the near shore and not the middle of the crossing, the place that reveals itself in the arriving. Gate, pragate, prasagate, bodhisattva. Let the words settle now, without holding them. Let them pass through the mind the way the breath passes, arriving, present for a moment, and then going, making room for whatever comes next, which may be another thought, or may be nothing in particular, nothing with a name. The body is already crossing. It has been crossing since before you noticed. The muscles are already at their night work of letting go, the breath is already in its slower rhythm, the darkness is already doing what darkness does when it is not opposed, which is simply to be what it is, patient and large and without edges, the way Nyat is without edges. The way the teaching that has no place to finally land and be fixed is without edges, no eye to close in the sutra's sense, just the eyes closing, no body to rest, just the body resting, no mind to quiet, just the quiet arriving, the way the far shore arrives, which is gradually and without announcement and only recognizable in retrospect. Subject closed for the night. Let it all relax away.